Okay, so this next series of presentations is not about features that are directly in Diva, but it's actually a bit of a sampling of my most recent research work at MIT that has involved Diva, and it's mostly looking on visual comfort of occupants in spaces. And you'll see one is more about comfort, and one is more about the actual ability to do your job. So we're starting with comfort presentation. And just a little bit of a background on what actually Diva does for its comfort calculations, and the history of that research is that people have actually been trying to predict visual comfort based on input data, measured data, since the 1920s. So you'd really think that it would be like solved by now in a sense, but actually it's very confusing. There's, by some counts, there's over 250 different visual comfort metrics, and by the same researcher, actually none of them predict comfort very well. But what we found in this research is that glare actually has, or visual comfort actually has there's many different causes of discomfort. It could be the contrast that you see when you're sitting at your desk. It could be the overall brightness. It could just be too bright. There could be veiling reflections from your monitor. The electric lighting could be totally annoying, and then, of course, direct sunlight could be like landing on your eye or on your desk. So what we're really attempting is to make a good framework with which to analyze all of these different causes of discomfort. So this kind of leading statement at the bottom here. So the idea is that we can predict, if we can predict visual comfort at a point in time, then we can make annual calculations of that comfort, and they will have some relationship to something that I'm calling visual satisfaction. So how satisfied are people with the space? Because that's really what you want to get when you run the annual climate-based daylight autonomy metrics. You want to know how much do you have enough light X% of the time. And in turn, you also really want to know how satisfied are people with the comfort in that space as well, not just how happy are they at 9 a.m. on September 21st. So I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly, but we're using a bunch of existing metrics that have been validated by various entities to predict different aspects of comfort and trying to combine them all in one. So glare or discomfort glare is what's in Diva right now primarily, and it's the physical discomfort or disability of an occupant caused by excessive light or contrast. And we're using the daylight glare probability metric based on a 2011 study we did. You can actually read it online. It's available. It's called the Adaptive Zone. And but the reason daylight glare probability is being used in Diva is because it doesn't just look at contrast. So here's the function. The first part is basically comfort is relative to the brightness that you see. So this EV is vertical eye illuminance. And the second part, this kind of summation, is the summation of all the contrast sources. So it's the contrast component of glare. And before DGP, all of the glare metrics really just had this second part of the equation. So DGP caught a lot more glare by adding brightness to the calculations. Of course, monitor contrast is a big one that really not very many people are calculating right now, to my knowledge at least. And it's really just based on, well, what is the brightest pixel on your monitor, what's the least bright pixel on your monitor, and how much light is being reflected from your monitor. And that's going to change your contrast ratio of your monitor. And if it falls below 4 or 5, it starts to be harder. And that's coming from the international standard, the ISO 2008 standard. And of course, finally, there's direct sunlight. So no one likes to see the sun or have direct sunlight on their desk. And the new IAS metric from 2012 suggests that over 1,000 lux is really the threshold where that becomes annoying. Actually, they suggest that if more than 1,000 lux is in more than 5% of the space, that all the blinds should be closed. I don't really agree with that, but that's what it says. So we've taken this, so we have these metrics, and we know we can calculate them. And then the question is, well, how do we know how people actually feel about them? Well, luckily we have students. This was done when we were all still at Harvard. So this is Dunn Hall Graduate School of Design at Harvard, and you see it's like a 4-tiered space there's about 500 students to sit in this one gigantic room. And basically there's east-facing clerestory windows, and there's floor-to-ceiling glass at the north and the south. So you might automatically say this is extremely horrible, but the glass is about 13% VLT, so it's not. So it's a little less clear. It's not completely oversaturated, even though there is a lot of glazing. And we just so you're oriented here, we plot this such that the 4 floors are kind of combined into one stacked plan. So this is the second floor, so the third floor, fourth floor, and this floor here. North is this direction, so here's the floor-to-ceiling north glazing along this red dot line, and the floor-to-ceiling south glazing is along this line. There. So looking at it in a kind of perspective view, this is from the south. You see the east-facing clerestories again. You see the floor-to-ceiling glazing, and there's also, of course, a contextual component to this, which is that there is a building, the CGIS building to the east of Gunn Hall, and has extremely reflective solar-controlled glazing. So that, as we'll see later, actually causes some problems, especially in the afternoon. So we surveyed all the students in the space, and we wanted them to tell us how comfortable they were at different times of day overall working at their desk. And actually we had a fair amount, like responses came from everywhere. So reasonably random sampling of the space. And about 67 students replied that did not experience discomfort due to electric lighting. So those are the ones those are the students that we used to calibrate the model. We asked a whole bunch of questions, a long survey trying to remove some aspects of bias. But the important questions that come out of it were basically asking them during the morning, the midday, and the afternoon kind of periods, how comfortable did you feel in your space? So it's a subjective survey, but the way we experience architecture is also subjective. That's what I always say when people try to fight me on this. And then we also asked them, well, if you are indeed experiencing discomfort, what causes that? Just so we can mention out And then we get just this is from the results of that poll. We can find out, well, how comfortable are people in Gunn Hall at different times of the day. Actually, only 47% of people enjoy the space in the morning, which it makes sense. They have east-facing clerestories. The sun is in the east. The sun is really coming in everywhere. That number improves to 63%, although the 4 people that sit in front of the south glazing are really just being baked. In the afternoon, when the sun is to the west, not in view of the clerestory windows, it rises a bit. So we know how comfortable and how uncomfortable the students are at different times of day, and we know exactly which desks are the ones that are comfortable. So this is a plot of the survey responses for the morning period. Green dots are students who said they were comfortable. Yellow dots are students that they were just a little uncomfortable. Orange dots are students that said they were uncomfortable, and red dots are people who said it was like unbearable. Actually, I think no one in the morning said it was unbearable, but a lot of people were quite uncomfortable. And so when we started this research, actually we thought that the daylight glare probability metric, because it considers brightness, because it considers contrast, that it would just work, and we wouldn't need to do anything else. And we found out we were actually quite wrong. So in this case, this is us trying to predict the comfort with DGP, discomfort glare. And what you see is really only people who sit near the facade, more or less, are experiencing enough glare to be caught by the fire simulations. The reason for that is because of the low visible light transmittance of the glass, and because you notice all of these dots are red, none of them are orange or yellow practically, because they don't experience that much DGP. You have to crank the sensitivity of the metric up so high. This is the best match to get just using DGP. If we look at the direct illuminance, it's a bit of a similar thing, because the people who sit in the middle, which they just get light from the clerestories, don't get enough direct sunlight to necessarily register with just the direct illuminance. But the people, of course, who sit on the south, sit on the east mezzanine windows do. And if we look at monitor visibility, it actually does the best out of all of the single metrics, but it only registers discomfort for people who are facing north in the space. So if you face if your monitor faces the north sky, then you're okay. faces the south glazing, then of course there's some problems. So none of them are very good, but when we combine them, we can get a better sense. And that's what this slide is trying to suggest. These are the discomfort plots, basically day of the year here and time of day here, for the 4 different measures: so discomfort glare probability, contrast ratio, direct sunlight falling on your eye, and direct sunlight falling on the desk. And they're all calibrated to be red for when there's discomfort. So if we look at example 1 desk, we see this guy has no discomfort glare, but he can't see his monitor for the first month of the school year. And he has direct sunlight on his desk every day in the morning and almost every day in the afternoon. That's 2 separate causes of glare, and they don't necessarily line up at the same time of day. The second example is a kind of a clear case of discomfort, actually. He has discomfort glare every day. Direct sunlight, he sees the sun, basically, that's the big problem. And then there's sunlight on the desk. But it's still registering multiple causes. And so now this is really the conclusion of this half of the presentation. But we're able to combine all of these aspects and make basically glare maps, or comfort maps, really, what we could say, of the entire space of gun hall. So this is for all 500 desks. These simulations took about 2 months. But we see in the morning, there's actually people, so people who sit by the windows are clearly uncomfortable, and the people who sit in the middle are kind of yellow or orange uncomfortable, which is what the survey said, more or less. We get about a 52% exact match. And we're pretty close within one threshold, 76% of the time. In the middle of the day, we're also kind of mimicking that behavior. So on the south, where the sun is coming in, people are quite unhappy. In this case, we have a 68% exact match. We're pretty close to 86% of the cases. And in the afternoon, it's basically the same kind of thing. We start seeing some of the reflective glare from the CGIS building, the round one over here. So that's what I would call the conclusion of this half of the presentation. But there's a couple of follow-up things I just want to mention. Some people are, when you start dealing with human subjects, some people are never satisfied. So if we take in the case of this person, so in the morning, his neighbors are relatively unhappy. That's fine. But in the afternoon, so the middle dot is what the response pulse said. The outer colors are what the model predicts. This is from an older version of the study. In the middle of the day, he's still very unhappy, and both of his neighbors are really happy. And in the afternoon, he's still very unhappy, and both of his neighbors are relatively happy. So this guy just clearly has some problem with the place. You can't always predict that. I mean, whenever you build something, someone's going to be unhappy for some reason, probably. But we want to catch as many problems as there are possible. Another thing we noticed is that students, so take for example the person who sits here. I just made this simulation to make a point, but every day at 10:30, direct light falls on this guy's monitor for about 15 or 20 minutes. Clearly he wouldn't like that, and actually what this person did in the space was they just rotated their monitor so they sat at their side table instead of at their main desk. And that doesn't happen if they sit at the side table. The sun kind of actually passes like here, so it hits the person but not the monitor. And we noticed when we went through the school after the survey that there were a lot of this kind of thing, like just moving around your desk, or some students build shading devices over their desks and really adapt to the space. And there is a bit of adaptive visual comfort in Vivo right now for the annual glare metrics. But this, I think, is predicting, or being able to say, at least use these maps to say, well, what happens if we just have everyone sit looking to the east or to the west? Like, what is that going to do for the comfort distribution? So that's where I think we're really going with this kind of metric. I'm just going to follow on through to the second part of the presentation, which is about disability glare. Am I okay on time here? This one is a bit more of a fun project in the sense that it's really what a consulting project might be. So we got called by an airport, actually. And so just to orient, this is a high dinner range photograph. And just to orient you, this is the taxiway. This is from the air traffic control tower. This is the taxiway where airplanes have to taxi in, or one of them. And what happened at this airport was they built a brand new, around 900 panel photovoltaic array on this parking deck here. And what they did not anticipate is that it would reflect the sun. So the taxiway when we took this photo was about 9,000 candela per meter squared. This monitor, around 300 candela per meter squared, and kind of a bright LCD monitor. And the PV panels, when this photo were taken, are reflecting about 250,000 candela per meter squared. So if we take the baseline of brightness as this monitor, that's like 3 orders of magnitude brighter than the monitor. So the human eye, physiologically, more or less can only adapt to 2 orders of magnitude brightness. So what really happens here is you get after images, and then you can't see anything. You can't see the flames, you can't see the monitor, and it's actually blinding and disabling glare. So obviously this is a problem for the airport. And if you look at this another way, even if it was possible, which is really not really that easy to adapt, so you can see the airplanes, your eye would be adapted to such a bright luminance, you wouldn't be able to see the monitor, and that's also, of course, a problem because you need to know that controlling air traffic. So what they're actually doing at the airport is they're just covering these massive PV panels with tarps so they don't reflect light. And I mean, the glare doesn't happen across the whole panel array at any time, so they move the tarps based on the time of year. But they're probably covering about 1/3 of them at any given time. It's not very nice, but it's probably better than crashing planes. And what went wrong is, you might say, well, doesn't the FAA have some sort of like analytical framework in place for this? They do, but it's not very good. The FAA basically says, well, you can just treat these panels as mirrors. So if the sun hits it, it reflects at the reciprocal angle. Right? That's not the right term. But and in fact, if that's the case, then the sun would always bounce over, the light would always bounce just over the air traffic control tower during the morning. Unfortunately, that's not actually how reflections work off of PV panels. They're kind of a diffuse surface. They have glass, subsurface scattering, and really, when the sun hits the panel, it actually reflects out in kind of like you might call like a semi-specular method. So we measured. And actually, the extent of this angle is dependent on the incident angle of the sun. So it's not actually a very easy thing to measure. If the sun hits directly, it may be like a 5% spread. If the sun hits kind of to the edge, it may be like a 10% spread. And we measured that with a photovoltaic spectrophotometer and very careful high dynamic range photographs. But there are better ways to measure it. We just don't have access to them. So that once we measured it, we were able to make radiance material models. This is a high dynamic range photograph. We just took one of the panels outside and took a picture of it. And then we tried to render the same thing with our custom materials. And we actually get pretty close. It's not too bad. And at that point, of course, they have very good 3D models at the airport. We're able to import it into Rhino quite easily from a bit of Revit model. And then we could compare the high dynamic range photograph we took from the control tower. Here, the yellow areas are areas greater than 30,000 candela per meter squared, or greater than 2 orders of magnitude brighter than the monitor. And we're able to compare that to simulations. And also, we calibrated it, and obviously this had some work going on in the background, but we're able to match the photographic reality with the simulation. And once you do that, you can just do it for every hour or for every 10 minutes in the year. This is every 10 minutes in the year, so from January to December, from midnight to midnight. And so actually most of the year, for like 10 months in the year, they have, or 9 months in the year, they have extremely high areas of reflection. The colors are based on the size of the reflection. And these pink crosshairs indicate when we took the photo. So this photo is at this time. They built the array somewhere around here. So what they don't even know is that it's actually going to get much worse in May and July. It's coming. So one thing we were able to do just with that data, they're all rendered images that made up this plot. We're also able to look at the monthly distribution of that glare. So in January and November, the glare is just starting to come in. But as we move on to March, it kind of moves to this part of the PV array. May over here, July kind of to the north end of it, and then by September and November it goes back, so the sun kind of comes up and goes down throughout the year. And this was used to give them a schedule of where they should actually put those tarps until they fix the problem with the field. So brainstorming with them, we came up with 3 different solutions. One would be just to take the panels, instead of having them oriented southwest, we just rotate them and orient them all southeast. This is the preferred option. I like the clean geometric solution. They would also look at the idea of, at their request, kind of building a shading device there on the parking lot, which have to be quite tall. It has to be, the parking lot's 5 stories. The shading device would have to be 5 stories tall to block the view of the air traffic controllers. Or to put one here on the air traffic control tower. So both of these solutions are ones that the Federal Aviation Administration doesn't exactly like, because it might actually block view of the runways. So we're going with this one, and I think they're actually going to do it. And we can run the simulations. There's no glare. You can't see the front of the panels from the air traffic control tower. I mean, it's pretty obvious. But then, of course, someone may ask, well, what about the pilots? This is a diagram of the approach runways to the airport. So there's 4 different approach paths and 2 runways. And the PV panels are about right here. So once we turn them to look at the pilots, could that be a problem? So this is just the visibility of the panels from different points along those approach paths. This was just done running a simulation with all the safeties that do that, actually. And the most visible area of PV panel is on approach path 35, 300 feet above ground. They can see 0.00018 solid angle steradian of PV panel. That's very small, basically. And if we compare that in terms of what the actual air traffic controllers can see right now, sitting at their desks of the PV panel, I mean, basically you see nothing else matters. It's the fraction that the pilots would see of the panel in terms of their total view is so small, there's basically no potential for glare. So that's kind of like the analysis that should have happened before they built this. Obviously, it's extremely expensive to start rotating, like to remove like 900 panels in these huge metal racks. But I mean, it has to be done. Well, thank you. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions about either presentation. Yes.
The survey, the students made clear that it was highlighting their question, because I'm asking what was the contribution of thermal distance? Was there any?
We did. It was clear we were talking about visual. We did actually ask a few thermal comfort questions just out of our own curiosity, but it was clearly defined that it was a visual comfort survey.
How much did you rely on the photographs and then the actual, experience you were able to take from the build results? A lot of times we don't have access to a project that's been built wrong to analyze before we do this sort of research.
Yeah, that's very true. So we basically relied on the photographs to calibrate our models, because if you've ever done any like PV design consulting, there's not really any good material models of reflections from PV panels out there. And of course, that's like part of the problem. So, I mean, if we had a good material model from the beginning, we would have just been able to run the simulations and find it without need of those photographs. And I mean, in a way, this project is kind of a plea for someone should be measuring these things, or at least having some rules of thumb about. It's not okay if the solar reflections just pass over the air traffic control tower, because obviously there's going to be some scattering. Does that answer your question? More or less.
More or less. So I guess the question is, you need to do enough analysis for every material that you use to be able to accurately.
I mean, anything that, when you build a big surface and it has some specularity to it, I mean, there's always potential for a problem. I mean, you see it in other projects like the kind of Kurt Hotel in Las Vegas that concentrated the light. I mean, normally, even in a normal case, like if these weren't air traffic controllers, you might just say, well, just close your blinds. It's not that big of a deal. It's only an hour every day. But in the case of air traffic controllers, they can't do that, obviously. So, the potential for impact is much higher here as well. So, I mean, but it is as we're building with more specular materials, PVs, very large curtain wall systems, it's going to become a somewhat larger problem.
Maybe one way of how you can deal with that in a firm is that you have one person that knows radiance better and then can basically define materials. And if you then use at a firm level maybe a calibrated camera for HDR photography, then you get a sample. Because I mean, what else is there? You could have done that before you built about 900 panels, right? So if you install a type of glazing or a type of PV panel that you know has a specular component. Yeah, I mean, in the best world, the manufacturer provides it for you, which in most cases they don't know. Then you would try to do it yourself, like placing a bright light source and figure it out. So. Or if you have the resources, North Berkeley National Laboratory has one photometer. There's some you can send them samples. In this current climate, they might do this measurement for free because they're collecting this big database. If practitioners ask them for the database, if they finally release it, they might prove it as well. So there is some data available.
Yes.
For the contour analysis, were there a time frame throughout the year that you mentioned? Like I think one of your graphs was showing January to April.
Yes, and that's basically the time the students were at their desks. So it was basically one semester. So we didn't run it fully annually. We ran it every 6 minutes for the length of the semester for that stuff.
Could you repeat the question?
The question was about the time of year in the gun hall study. So if we had picked just a particular period of year, and we did pick a particular period of year with the semester which the students were in the space. But I mean, if they had sat there all year, we would have done the whole year.
Because the result could be relevant, for example, if you rotated the entire desk, just and in the summertime, like you actually get big one, completely different direction, anyway, combination.
So the comment was that maybe it makes sense to rotate your desk just at one time of the year and not others, which is absolutely the case. And I mean, I might say as a kind of response to that, maybe it's okay if you have to rotate your desk 2 or 3 times a year if you can avoid a lot of unpleasantness. But no, absolutely. But the survey results just didn't lend themselves to an annual study in this case.
To make this useful for practice, I'm not sure if you all know, you can actually with the current GUI do this type of analysis. You just have to define multiple viewpoints, and these viewpoints and directions basically define a space, both location as well as orientation, where you assume somebody can sit and look. So if you have a flexible desk, you basically provide 20 points and allow people to in different directions, move around, and then you just basically under glare say you use the adaptive molded lever, and then it basically tells you where's the least amount of glare. So your assumption is I can adapt to the space. So if you have a high-end L-shaped furniture and you want to convince somebody to put that in, this is how you would build an argument, as opposed to when somebody's new to the desk and can only look in one direction. And the results are very strong. The difference. You get 2 different glare maps. In the one case, you would see glare the whole year because somebody's going forward. In the other case, you hardly get any glare.
Depending on the space, but there's often a strong difference if you allow complete adaptation. You always look away from the most glaring area.
Has anybody used this? Oh, you used it, good. And what happened?
It was fine for the product. It was kind of as a sample test, and then we just went back and just used very little comparison for ultra appropriate done.
Actually, 1 is much higher than I expected. Well, thank you.